Welcome back to Second Breakfast and our ongoing horror discussions, bringing you the best thoughts, theories, and literary analysis this side of New England. Ooh. We're finally here. 453 episodes in, we're finally talking about the one movie we've been dreading doing an episode on for 5 years now.
It is my favorite movie. It is your favorite movie.
It is
our favorite
movie of all time. We're finally talking about Robert Eggers' The Witch. We are doing a series the entire month of December going back. I hate how tainted that fucking word is.
Oh, I know what you mean.
Going back through the entire career of Robert Eggers to discuss and analyze and celebrate. We don't do reviews. Those absolutely suck.
In anticipation of Nosferatu.
Right. So on Patreon, this past, actually a week or two ago, we started this project by going through all of his short films from before The Witch. So that is Hansel and Gretel and The Telltale Heart and Brothers. And then last week we did The Lighthouse. And today we're finally doing The Witch.
I'm really glad we've already gotten some Eggers under our belt because, as y'all know, this is our favorite movie. And so the reason we've been afraid to do this episode is because we love this movie so much and it feels like one of those things that's really hard to tackle and talk about. So I'm glad we've kind of gotten some of the Eggers discussion going already.
Me too.
And I say that we've covered our other favorite movies before. This is like the spectrum of my being. Is my favorite movie is The Witch. Also, my favorite movie is Pride and Prejudice 2005. And we did that. Same for you, Cam. Your favorite movie is The Witch, but it's also Goodfellas. And we've talked about that. The only one we haven't done is Tombstone, but I guess
we'll get there.
That's for another time. But so we've done this. We can do this. But we've done this. We can do it before. It's fine. So I'm really excited to talk about this.
Yes, and I think we should start there. So that we've got three things we're going to talk about here. We're going to talk about why this is our favorite movie ever and break down all of those different reasons. Then we're going to talk about some echoes that follow through from the short films and The Lighthouse from our discussion last week. And then we're going to talk about some new observations we had watching this film once again, almost 10 years later in a theater. Shocking, the numbers we're getting now.
It was so much fun. I could not believe that we were able to see this in the theater. I've only ever seen it one time in the theater when it came out, and every other time I watched it on my laptop, on a TV,
I can't believe it was almost 10 years ago.
I don't want to talk about that. I simply don't. I'm like, yeah, this movie it just came out a couple years ago, 9 years ago. It's fine.
So let's start with our first section.
Okay.
Why is this our favorite film ever? I have a bunch of reasons. Feel free to just jump in whenever.
Sure. Yeah, sounds good.
So the first one for me, I immediately thought of the first Godfather. Because people talk about this all the time. Why do you prefer Godfather 1 or Godfather 2 over the other? Because we generally, culturally agree that they're two of the best movies ever made, and people make their various arguments. For me, there's never been a question. I've always been a Godfather 1 guy. And I think that is the same rationale for why I love The Witch more than almost every other movie ever made.
Okay.
It's because both of these stories, The Witch and the first Godfather, they document the operatic collapse and destruction of a really volatile family.
Yeah.
There's a clearly defined scope to the point that they almost work like a slasher movie when you have the slow whittling down of the cast, and then there were none kind of progression, where the movie builds to a really satisfying end, where there's usually, the final girl or the last guy standing, just Michael Corleone in the chair.
I see.
And that, for me, makes any work of art like that. I mean, you can pull back to Shakespeare and any of these other sort of imploding tragedies. It makes those stories feel incredibly complete for me.
Yes, yeah.
But because they're about families, you can talk about Haunting of Hill House here too, because they're about these tight-knit, complicated families, every betrayal, every death, instead of just slasher teens getting murdered in the woods, because it's a family, every loss or betrayal is so punishing. And we like the pain. We like the punishment in a story like this. So yeah, in the same way I love The Godfather 1, I think The Witch taps into that Shakespearean territory, that primal, immortal human drama that just connects with me.
I like that a lot. And I think what makes this work even more, what makes it even more effective for me, is it's not just this implosion of a family. It's because of their isolation and the cultural background they're existing in, this family sort of represents, is like a representation of a community imploding. puritanical society is so interesting to me and scary and frightening and familiar all at the same time. Like, it feels really strange, but also like it could happen anytime.
What do you mean by familiar?
Just in terms, like, one of the things that really interests me in art and in film and stories is religious fanaticism and, you know, mob mentality, and what happens when extremist views can corrupt people on a societal level, and what is that, and how does that affect people individually and in the larger scope. And Puritanism is so scary. And I think is some, like, often when you think about like aggressive Christianity in the US, it feels to me a lot like Puritanism. It's less about Catholicism and more about like Protestantism for me. And so, and it's also just something I'm familiar with. I grew up Christian and very religious, and so it's very like personal to me as well. And so it feels like this family is sort of like a small community, and it's like, this is sort of like a, what happens if you take the Salem witch trials but put it just in one household.
Yeah, sure.
And that's what's really I think what works for me so well is like, not only is it a family, it's also this like societal thing all mixed into one, which makes it really like explosive and intense.
What if The Crucible was even more of a horror movie?
Yeah, exactly. And it was it was a family turning on each other in a way that a neighborhood, a community, a society, a nation will turn on each other.
That's interesting, because I had the word familiar in my notes too, but I think from a different direction. The reason, I mean, there are a couple of reasons I've always really strongly identified with this film, maybe more than any of the other Robert Eggers movies, which I might love more. The way we talked about The Lighthouse last week, I might love that movie more than this one.
I think you do, interestingly enough.
But this one will always be the closest to my heart.
Yeah.
Because of that subtitle, A New England Folktale.
Yeah.
Because I grew up in New England. So I have that connection to it. I find this deeply personal, familiar, just bond with this film. And of course, just to get personal for a second, the movie came out in January of 2015. And in my life, that was an incredibly fraught and difficult time. So I've always felt incredibly tied to and invested in this film. But if we zoom out beyond me, beyond just my life and my journey, I think this film represents kind of a watershed moment for the two of us and what eventually became this show, this podcast, this YouTube channel. Because
I think you're so right, yeah.
This is the first A24 movie we saw.
Was it really?
I think so.
Wow.
I think it must have been.
I mean, this is the first time I think I had an inkling of what A24 was.
Yes, when you started to pay attention to production houses. Yeah, so
because like I think every time after that I saw an A24 film, I was like, oh, that's the studio that did The Witch, and so I was excited every time.
But that also became a reason to see those movies.
Exactly.
Like,
yeah.
This movie, I think, set us on the journey of art house, indie horror, weirdo shit with period dialogue and insane surrealism. And most of that journey has been chronicled in the 453 episodes of this show.
Yeah, I think you're right.
From going through horror classics to even the wackier, falling in love with Lars von Trier, like all of the weird horror that we've jumped into. I think all that starts here. Because like I knew the classics. I knew The Exorcist. I remember showing you Saw for the first time. Or
terrified me.
James Wan movies. But this one felt like just a cardinal shift in the type of art you and I loved and paid attention to.
I also think this is the first movie, first horror movie that I went to the theater to see, because my horror journey started pretty much in undergrad with you, and you were kind of showing me things like Saw and a couple back catalog things, and I had accidentally peer pressured seen Black Swan when it came out, but I didn't seek out that movie. I ended up seeing it, and it traumatized me because I felt I was too young. I really wasn't. I was like 18, but it really upset me at the time. But this was the first horror movie that I was like, this movie is coming out. I remember watching the trailer in the library while we were supposed to be studying. I remember watching the trailer and thinking, I want to go see that. And I think I had never done that with a horror movie before.
And it was yours. There's something with classic horror when a friend shows it to you and they're watching it over your shoulder and they're watching you for your reaction, where it feels like it's something you're supposed to like. So even if you do appreciate John Carpenter's Halloween, you're supposed to. You're just falling in line, you're catching up. But there's a sense of ownership you have over your generation's landmark horror movies. I was there on opening night when Paranormal Activity came out.
Right.
So I feel a sense of investment and complicity with that franchise, which is why I follow these things so rapturously. And I remember seeing The Witch with you and Tristan, and that felt like our movie.
Yeah, it really did.
So,
I remember like leaving the theater and being like so blown away. And that was, again, one of the first times I had like left a movie theater thinking, that was really something special, and I really want to talk about it with somebody.
Yes,
like that was like, because again, it was hitting us at the perfect time in our lives. We were like, I think like juniors in college, and so like that's when you really start to want to be talking about things and developing your own ideas, and that's just when I started to get really, really interested in film. So it was pretty cool.
Yeah, and I think I was defining a lot of my passions and interests at that time too. And something else everyone who listens to the show will be familiar with is how much I love Dr. Faustus.
Right.
And that was in college. That was the first year of college, same year I met you, that I read Dr. Faustus for the first time. So all of these things just came into focus for me. And we talked about this a little last week. I bring Faustus in wherever I think it's appropriate. But The Witch is the most straightforward, clean, rapturous, elemental Faustus retelling of our age.
Of course. What is becoming a witch if not making a deal with the devil? Makes sense.
We literally do that at the end. We sign the book, we see the devil, we go up and float with the witches, and it does all of that in 90 minutes. And it's not just the Faustus retelling, it's this kind of fascination I've always had with literary or artistic depictions of the devil in fiction. To the point that Tristan and I took a class together on Satan throughout the kind of literary canon.
You did.
In
Why didn't
college.
I take that class? I feel like such an idiot. I should have taken that class.
It was fantastic.
But it was.
Shout out Professor Lang. But between Faustus and Dante and the Bible and Paradise Lost and some books I've written and most of our joint favorite horror, I think this stands tall with its depictions of the devil and Satan and corruption and all of that stuff that I just find endlessly entertaining and fascinating.
What is it that you like about this story's version of the devil? It
is the power of suggestion.
Yes.
I think it's so much of how the witches are presented too. There are some horror movies you watch, and I think this happens a lot with the ones that become classics, maybe for us more than the general public, but there are some movies that feel cursed or wicked, or like you're not supposed to be watching it, or when you read about kind of how they had a priest come and exorcise the set.
Yeah, right.
And there's something just cursed about how it feels. And every wide shot you get of the woods in this film, it just feels haunted.
Yeah.
It feels like there's something in every frame.
You're right. A lot of horror movies, and this isn't a bad thing, but a lot of horror movies do a lot of work to make something look or feel creepy or scary or unsettling. They've really got to make that doll look as horrifying as possible. They've really got to design that creature in a really unsettling way. They've got to really, adjust the set and the camera angles and the lighting to make it be like, what's in the shadows, but it feels, I know this isn't true, but Eggers pulls it off where it feels like he doesn't even have to try. It's like he just turned a camera on these woods, and the woods themselves are so haunting and strange and unsettling that you feel so uncomfortable. The same way when they're eating dinner in the house, and it's really, really dark because they just have candlelight and the fire, and there's just all this invasive, really deeply unsettling darkness around them. And you've already seen the full interior of the house in daylight. You know what the house looks like. You've seen every inch of that house. But of the course of the movie, you see it all. But there's something about the scene where they're eating dinner that you're like, what the hell is behind them? It's just all of these scenes feel so just in and of themselves unsettling and wrong and haunted. And I don't know how he does it, but it's really, really impressive.
I think all great horror movies have that feeling of terror when you it doesn't have to be like a jump scare, but when you have a cut to some sort of shocking, memorable imagery.
Yeah.
But you have to balance that with a feeling of dread and anticipation and that lurking just evil where there's no special effects happening. The camera's just panning through a room and someone's walking nervously. But when you pair that with the terror and you just pace out those things perfectly, it becomes this beautiful dance. But I think the all-timer horror movies, I've been thinking about this a little lately, they remind me of House of Cards. And I mean that in terms of the phrase, the kind of narrative framework more than the Netflix show.
Okay.
That idea, I'm thinking of Ocean's 11. Because the thing I love about Ocean's 11 isn't just the big heist at the end. It's kind of the power fantasy at the beginning, when everything's going right before it all goes sideways. And I think you get that in something like House of Cards, where Frank has to get to the top before everything falls to shit. And in a horror movie, especially a Robert Eggers movie, everything does fall to shit at the end and the people go insane.
Yeah.
But at the beginning, I like that tease. I like that excitement. And the reason I love Faustus stories, I mean, back to the original, back to Marlowe, who's not the original, but he's the best one. Back to Marlowe, you have at the beginning, when he signs the contract, he gets unlimited potential.
Yeah.
He gets to, soar through the cosmos and get all these impossible supernatural answers and insights that no one could ever dream of. And then you get that creeping dread and the horror and him trying to, quickly bargain his way out of the contract and then being dragged down to hell. And I love that The Witch taps into some of that, but in reverse. Because there is no opportunity and excitement and a rise to the top at the beginning. It's pretty much shit until the last 5 minutes.
Yeah, I mean, they're trying. There's ambition. We're going to conquer the wilderness. We're going to survive out here on our own. We're going to go catch, animals in the
traps. But they're
we
failing
set.
the whole time.
Yeah, none of it ever works.
So instead of that achievement, and explicitly in the place of that achievement, you get yearning and humanity and desperation and that word we always go back to in our Faustus discussions of striving.
Yeah.
And then at the very end, after everything's gone to shit, then you open up the whole cornucopia of the supernatural insight and wisdom and all of these cosmos
possibilities,
and you gesture at that. So you get that moment of release. Instead of letting it atrophy and rot in front of you, you get that at the end as this flyaway. And it's so much about the power of suggestion. You barely ever see the bad guy. In the same way, you barely ever see the prize, the thing that the soul is traded away for. So I just think it taps into everything I love, but in this satisfying and restrained way.
Yeah, it is very restrained. Like, there are a lot of really unsettling images in the movie, but I remember a lot of critique. Not a lot. There was some critique when the movie came out, people saying, like, it's not very scary. Like, there are no jump scares. Like, nothing really happens. Like, it's not very scary.
Yeah.
And
a lot of people are wrong all the time.
Exactly. Like, I understand that point of view, I guess, but like, you're right. It is so suggestive, and it makes it feel much more real. Because if you think about it on its surface, the idea of a witch is absurd. The idea of a creepy lady in the woods, stealing a baby and grinding it up and stealing all these children and possessing these and going inside a goat and talking to kids, like, it doesn't make any sense. It's stupid. But it's presented in this way that feels so real and possible because it's so understated. And I remember I watched the commentary from Robert Eggers on this several years ago, and he had said one of the things he was so interested in about this period was that witches were not this weird fairy tale thing. They were a real thing to these people. It was a real world concern. And so I think that's achieved really well here, where you can see the paranoia and the suspicion and the actual, like, real fear from these people, even though it is, the idea of a witch is pretty absurd to our modern point of view.
But it's also a pretty simple idea. Because the way the family turns on each other, at various points, pretty much everyone is accused of being a witch.
Yes.
But there's not some, like, extra supernatural element to it. When you turn to the Jonas and Mercy, the two young kids, and you say, you're witches, you don't mean that they suddenly have horns and great big long fingernails and teeth. And they look the same. So the idea of the witch at the time is as much about the power of suggestion as the movie showing you an occasional picture of a naked old woman is.
Right.
Like, we don't...
Because it is understated, because it's invisible. Like, that's what's so scary about it to them, is like somebody could have signed the devil's book and you wouldn't know.
The way they talk about it is in terms of, like, practical stage effects, and the way we see it is just, a woman turning around and laughing at us.
Right, and it's like a lot of metaphorical things. You hear William, the father, talking about the devil waggling his tongue in Thomason's mouth. He doesn't mean literally. He doesn't think the devil's standing there making out with her. He means, like, it's all metaphorical. Yes. And I don't think any of them think there's a real physical book. I think, like, that you sign. I think it's just, it's all metaphorical. Just like prayer is, immaterial and metaphorical. That's how they view it all.
The only impossible thing in the entire movie is a lady floating at the end.
Sure. There's also the lady the witch who flies in the broom earlier in the beginning. Not the broom, it's just a stick.
Yeah, but the way that shot zooms out, it just looks like a crow. Like, I feel like you could read that metaphorical,
and also
too.
it could be like a dream. It could be a hallucination she's having, just
For
like
being a
Catherine's hallucination with the bird and the breastfeeding, you know.
For being a movie about the devil and witches and people who fly around and grind up babies, it's shocking how grounded the film is. But
Right.
I think we might be missing the forest for the trees here. It's a really good-looking movie.
It looks
It's
so
just
good.
beautiful. Like, let's rapid fire out a couple elements here.
Let's do it.
The desaturation. The film is incredibly muddy and grim and gray, but when there is color, and there's often color, it feels so rich.
It does. Like especially at the end, all the blood on Thomason's face compared with that like dour gray and like the palest pink imaginable dress that she's wearing and her like light blonde hair, like that contrast is really striking.
Or the candlelight. Or the young witch's red coat. When you see her running through the woods, when she opens the door for Caleb.
It's so good.
When you do get color, it's incredibly memorable.
It's really making a statement. Yeah. Again, because they're in this like harsh, cold wilderness where they don't have access to fancy dyes to make their clothes beautiful. Like they don't have glass. They don't have fucking apples. They don't have anything.
There is no color in their life.
No, they just have rotten corn and trees and wood, you know? So it's all like gray and brown. The colors are so beautiful in this movie.
And it was interesting because we've just done, we saw The Lighthouse in IMAX. That's what we used as the basis for last week's episode. Seeing this in a theater, for the first minute of the movie, like, oh, this is almost black and white. And
that's
then
true.
you are so seduced by the color and the warmth and the tone of so much of this. It's such a like sumptuous movie for being about a family who has nothing, that they're absolutely just dirt poor, grinding through this with all their shitty corn. There was such a luxurious feeling to how it was all presented,
almost
on
a
screen.
romanticism.
Yes,
like
yes, yes.
And we talked about this a little bit in our Patreon episode where we talked about the short films, but the way he composes a lot of his shots in all of his movies, but especially in The Witch, it feels very like 18th century, even 17th century, like Dutch paintings. Like it's just this beautifully composed or arranged composition. And it's like you get these great interior shots of the home, but also these like wide exteriors where you see the full house and the wilderness behind them and this really special tree. Like I'm thinking especially about early in the movie when they like are setting out to go to their farm, they're all sitting around a fire in the forest. Do you remember that shot? And then there's another one where after Caleb...
It's like a half-second shot, too.
Yeah, but it's like the most beautiful thing you've ever seen. that firelight is so strong. That contrast is so strong. And then there's a shot where after they've buried Caleb and right in front of that tree, and you can see the whole house and the parents standing there. It all looks like these like romantic... depictions of New England and like, the frontier, like the new world, Puritans seeking a new life, and it's hard work and it's grueling, but it's beautiful and it has all these promises. But it's like those shots paired with the horrible things that are happening and the deeply unsettling music, you're like, oh, this isn't right. So it's
hollow.
So it looks familiar to you because you've seen paintings like that. You've seen imagery like that of, you know, the beginnings of America, but it's paired with these horrific things that are happening. And so all that feels like sort of contaminated and poisoned in your brain.
Yes, it feels impossible as much as it feels recognizable. And there are so many shots that just feel so intricate.
Yeah.
Or symmetrical, or just framed in a way that is so beautiful, even when everything is so drab and miserable.
Right.
In the same way, the costumes. I mean, this is not a family with much money, but you can't look away from the details of, I mean, just the dad's hat and coats and all of his little shirts.
And they're all wearing like the same thing every day. Like Thomason has one dress and that's all she wears.
That cool hat she wears when she goes out on the horse.
Oh, yeah.
All of the costumes are beautiful.
It's so good.
And I feel like the sets and the costuming, there's a sensibility that permeates almost everything you see on screen, where it's simple but powerful. In the same way the goat, it's like, oh yeah, there it's a farm, so they have some animals, but this goat's always giving you the side eye.
Yeah, right. Goats always give you side eye.
I know,
because of their pupils.
Specifically, this goat seems to hate the viewer.
Yes, no,
you know,
you're right.
And I know he was a bastard to work with from the commentaries.
Yes, I remember that.
But just the way he's kind of huffing and puffing and his head's bobbing up and down, and he'll tilt his head and look at you. Yeah. There's something wrong. Yeah. There's something wrong with that goat.
Yeah, the whole movie's like that. There's just something that feels a little wrong and a little off. Like those shots of the hair when they're chasing him through the woods. I mean, the music is doing a lot of the heavy lifting there, like the really horrifying music is indicating to you that this hair is kind of, there's something wrong with it. But even still, just the way it's looking at you and those head-on shots and its bright yellow eyes, you're like, what is that thing?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. That rabbit's an evil prick.
Yeah.
I hate the way he's looking at me.
Hunting rabbits.
And the way his little nostrils flare open and closed, he's mocking you.
It's not right. There's something. And then you get those, like, as the movie escalates, things really start to go wrong. Like the milk of the goats turns to blood, and like the weird, creepy chicken egg that she drops.
The
like
crow breastfeeding.
Yeah, it's just things escalate and get more and more wrong and not right. And it's just like one little thing that's off and it ruins the whole
But
everything.
it's so indirect. All of those images, all of those feelings you get, it's all power of suggestion. It's not CGI blowouts. It's just an image that is wrong. Like, oh, a crow shouldn't be doing that.
Yeah.
And then when it cuts to the mom sleeping and you see the blood coming from her breast.
Yeah,
It's like,
awesome.
oh, God, I thought that was like a dream flyaway thing and now it's real and she's got that weird look on it. It's just unnerving.
And a lot of it goes unanswered too. Like we don't ever actually know if like did that whole thing happen? Did she just have this weird dream? Did she hurt herself while she was dreaming or while she was sleeping? We don't know. And even like the twins, we never actually see proof of how they die. We assume it is in the goat pen after all the goats are killed, but it's suggested. Same with Caleb. We see him die, but we don't see what happens to him with the witch in the woods. We can maybe guess, but we don't know. And so a lot of it is just, and even like with Thomason at the end, she becomes a witch, but what does that mean? What happens after that? It's all just sort of suggested and just there enough to help you know what's going on, but still there's plenty of room for you to wonder and be afraid in that way.
But it never feels like a cop-out. It never feels ambiguous. It feels...
Like, I don't know, like a Stephen King.
It's insidious.
Yeah.
It's planting these questions in your mind, and you have enough evidence to make, a lot of tangible conclusions, but it's just sticking with you.
Yeah, right. And it's
a briar.
And it's doing the Jaws thing where you have to imagine the horrific, whatever horrors happened to Caleb when he's gone. And
speaking of Jaws, let's talk about Mark Korven's score.
Oh my God. This was, I remember, so for context, I played the cello all through middle and high school. It's the best instrument out there. It's so beautiful. I won't hear any other argument. It's the best instrument. It has so much range and it just can sound so good. Also, like if you've listened to a second of Game of Thrones, you're a cello fan. Anyway, so so when this...
Or the intro to this show.
Right, yeah, it's a piano.
Oh,
it's a fully
we
a
tried
piano.
it with the cello first. Sorry, that was behind the scenes.
What's wrong with you? It's a piano. Anyway, so I remember seeing this movie, and the second, the movie's silent at the beginning, and then the first thing you hear is this amazing cello performance, and I remember thinking, oh yeah, I'm locked in. And it's so haunting and effective and strong and jarring and scary and beautiful all at the same time. This score is so good. And this is one of the scores that I have listened to many, 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 many times. Like, just like for fun, for vibes, like it's just a really solidly good and freaky and haunting score.
Yes, it sticks with you. And it's incredibly rewarding to revisit. I think Mark Korven's as bulletproof here as he was in The Lighthouse.
Yeah, I think this is a better score than The Lighthouse.
Okay.
But also, like, this is I prefer the like style and aesthetic of The Witch over The Lighthouse anyway, so that's also part of it. Like I prefer this period to the 19th century.
Yes.
But anyway,
the last element I think we should talk about here for why this is our favorite film ever. We got to take a minute and talk about these performances.
Man, everybody is so good. Like that's why I like this movie, is that every single part of this movie is incredible, including every one of the actors.
I mean, this movie gave us Anya Taylor-Joy, and we've loved and seen everything she's done since then. I mean, we did an episode on Emma. We love her in every single thing she's done.
Always so good.
But she is so good here.
She's
for being
really,
her first
big movie.
Yeah,
like she's so good in this, and she's in like almost every scene.
She anchors the entire movie.
She does, yeah,
mostly just with her face.
Right, but then you've got Ralph Ineson. This is the first time we had ever met Ralph Ineson, and now
I saw The Office, but yeah,
I hadn't. Okay, and so and it took me a long time to learn this guy's name. Sometimes I just like can't get an actor's name to stick. But Cam, you always go, the dad from The Witch, and I was like, oh yeah, I love that guy. So his voice. I don't have to talk about his voice. His voice is so.
Talk
good.
about his face.
His face is so interesting, and it looks so...
He's got a period piece face.
He does. It's so perfect for the time, and he looks so sad and broken, and like he's trying so hard.
The way his voice... I mean, he's got the deepest, richest, most textured, beautiful voice this side of Lance Reddick.
It's perfect for period dialogue. It's fantastic.
When it's breaking down...
Oh...
when he cries and breaks down when he's chopping wood alone at night there at the dark.
Yes.
The register his voice falls into, it feels like you're almost inverting vocal cords.
Yeah,
I've never heard that kind of tone anywhere else.
It's like unworldly. And then of course the mom, who we know as Lysa Arryn from Game of Thrones, she is so perfectly sad but also terrifying at the same time.
Yes, those turns she can make just by slightly tilting her head. She's incredible.
Very formidable.
But the person who really stuck out, and you talked about this on the way home, the performance that really hit you this time was Caleb.
This kid is doing so much. He is like, even if you don't even include his possession scene, which is Oscar worthy in its own right, that work he's doing is so good. But especially because there's so many long takes in that scene. But even before then, all of the this tortured, complicated performance that he's giving, he's so confused and sad about his baby brother dying, and he's afraid for his baby brother's soul in hell, and then he's asking his dad, what happens if I die? And he's trying to ask all these big picture questions,
and it's so understated, whether it's him trying to be the man of the house or live up to his father, or it's him struggling with falling into puberty and the only girl around is his sister, the kind of weirdness that he feels but doesn't express. So much of that is in glances.
Yeah, and it's just in his face. He's doing so much work with his face, and I think
he's freckle acting.
Yeah,
so good.
And it's so wonderfully impressive. I know exactly what he's thinking and feeling, and I can feel that adolescent confusion and frustration so strongly. And then you add his possession scene, and you're like, damn, this kid can act. And I'm like, where has he been? What else is he doing?
Well,
can we put him in something else,
that
please?
Might be on us. Maybe we just haven't followed his career
Okay,
enough,
well, if you know anything about what else this kid has done, I would love to watch it because he's fantastic.
This time he kind of stole the movie for us.
Yeah, he really did.
Yeah.
I was really stuck on him because when you first see the movie, you're stuck on Anya Taylor-Joy, you're stuck on Thomasin. She's the main character. She's also just, if you've never seen Anya Taylor-Joy before, you're just mesmerized by how she looks because she's beautiful and so weird looking at the same time, and she's giving this amazing performance, so you're really stuck on her, and then you're blown away by the parents and stuff, so you kind of forget about Caleb. But on a fifth rewatch, you're like, man, this kid is stealing the show.
It's a movie full of beautiful, fascinating faces and understated, incredibly developed performances. Yeah. So I want to jump into sort of the continuity that we've been developing through this series in the month of December. So we've talked about all three short films, The Telltale Heart, Hansel and Gretel and Brothers, and last week we talked about The Lighthouse. So let's take a minute to kind of bat around some echoes, some through lines that we have from those other projects into The Witch. We're purposely making this non-linear because I think all these works of art talk to each other in different ways.
Yeah, they do.
And a lot of it is subliminal. Not all of it is, not every choice an artist makes is intentional. I wrote a thing in a book this year, and I read a novel that I wrote in 2017 that I'm revising right now, and I used almost the exact same plot point and joke that felt so particular and stupid when I wrote it this year.
Yeah,
I was in the library when I stumbled upon it. Totally freaked myself out.
That's so funny.
So this shit is not always as intentional as it seems. So that's why we're not bothering really with the chronology of these releases.
Sure. And we did track some of this, especially when we did our Patreon episode with the short films. We did a lot of talking about Egger's other movies and how things carry over. But so I'm interested to see what you kind of track down here.
That's a big hour-long discussion. Go check that out.
Fun.
You'll get a lot out of that chat. But the first thing I want to talk about, and this is something we really tracked through the short films, is Candlelight.
Oh, yeah.
And this intense use of candlelight. And that's part of the, surreal Barry Lyndon sort of
I was going to say,
aesthetic.
this is where Barry Lyndon comes in.
But there's a lot of that here. I mean, Telltale Heart, the candle and the lantern is the way a lot of the drama is lit and navigated. And in The Witch, you have a triple candle lantern. The one Thomasin uses when she goes outside and finds Caleb when he stumbles back from the witch's cabin. It's 3 candles in this lantern, which ends up lighting most of Thomasin's face. You get more of that performance. In the same way that dinner scene that you mentioned earlier, there's this incredible candlelight kind of bathing the entire family. And then behind the dad to backlight the whole scene to give it even more of that haunted, fucked up, hellish drama, you have this intense, warm firelight. So it feels like he's he's continuing to learn how to use this candlelight, but also doubling down on it and ratcheting up that dramatic tension of it.
Well, and here specifically, the candlelight seems to really be functioning as this desperate attempt to get close to God and to find the light. I mean, that's one of the things that Thomason asks for in her big prayer at the beginning of the movie is, show me thy light. And that's a common theme you see throughout Christianity and through prayer is like, I want to see the light, especially when they're experiencing such a dark time, like both literally and figuratively. So this like constant seeking and this intense contrast between what the dark situation they're in and the light that they're searching for, it makes a lot of sense here.
And when she joins the devil or Black Phillip at the end of the movie, she's approaching a bonfire.
Yeah.
So it's the
brightest light we've seen
in the film.
Yeah.
I love all of that. We were noticing in particularly the short films, these kind of aperture shots that dilate open from a black screen.
Yeah.
And I noticed some of those here, but in a more naturalistic way. There wasn't that reminder of old school film technology.
Right.
There were some shots, particularly at night, that were framed by trees.
Yeah.
That almost recreated that aperture.
Or even the dinner scene, you're sort of framed by the darkness around them in the room because there's only light in the center. Yeah.
The short films also had a strong kind of recurring interest, particularly in Hansel and Gretel, because that was a silent film. There were a lot of title cards.
Yeah.
With text, with kind of chapter breaks. There were constant, that beautiful squirrely ass font. I loved all the title cards.
We got title cards in Telltale Heart as well.
Yes. Those were gone here.
Right.
But I still felt like they were kind of implied because, and I did not notice this, maybe I'm wrong, I did not notice this in The Lighthouse. I don't think it's in The Northman, but there were these fades to black that almost felt like the close of each chapter. It made the film, and I never noticed this before, but it made the film feel much more episodic, where something incredible would happen. Kind of those almost narrative-breaking flyaway shots of surrealism, like when you see the crow breastfeeding with the mother. Like, there's nowhere else you can go in a scene from there.
Right.
That's it. That is the
that's the pinnacle.
Mic drop, right?
Yeah.
After scenes like that, we'd fade to black for a second and then open on the next thing.
That's true.
And there were a lot of those throughout the movie.
Well, yeah, I was trying to figure out the timeline of this movie for another reason that we'll get into. And it once, like, after, not when Samuel dies, because then about 2 weeks pass, but then like once, like the day that William and Caleb go into the woods, that's when things start to really kick off. That towards the end of the movie, it's only like 4 days. And so I think that maybe you could argue that a lot of these fades to black probably happen at the end of each day, and it's only about 4 days. And so that makes a lot of sense, is like kind of like segmenting up the movie into these like significant different days. So I like that.
And it starts with one of those too. The way the music comes in, the way the movie makes you sit, I mean, especially when you see it in a theater, as I imagine it was intended. I mean, all filmmakers intend for you to see it in the theater. The way you just have to sit in a dark room for a minute and see the black screen, and it's not immersion breaking. You're not too aware of the room, but you're just surrounded by nothing.
Yeah.
And then you feel the music. And then it's that like evil Puritan council that's exiling the family.
Well, first it's the title card. It just says The Witch, a New England folktale, just on a black screen. Like you don't see, the first thing you see, apart from the like, different film production company logos that come up, is The Witch. That's all it says. And then you get to the Puritan thing. So yeah, it's like that kind of is our big title card. And then it's sandwiched by the very end of the film, where after it cuts to black and she's flying up into the sky and cuts to black, it's dark for a moment, and then you get that text on the screen saying this is like based on true accounts of witchcraft accusations from the period. That's where a lot of the dialogue comes from. I don't know the exact wording, but it's kind of like these beginning and end title cards that sort of hold and bookend the movie together.
And you get these fades to black in between those as kind of these chapter breaks. I thought that was an interesting continuity.
Yeah, I like that.
Thematically, we talked about some ideas that permeated a lot of the short films, and of course, The Lighthouse. We talked about guilt a lot in the Patreon episode. And this, I kind of proffered this idea that each of these stories has a singular moment of temptation. And then the rest of the story is the collapse, the repercussions and terrible consequences of giving in to this one awful moment of temptation. So much of this story is about temptation. It's about accusations of original sin and temptation for who's a witch and who gave in and who signed the book.
I was going to say, I feel like every scene, there's a moment of temptation in this movie.
I agree. But do you think there's one singular moment of temptation that kind of cascades the rest of the movie? I was trying to identify one.
I don't know, because every single person is important. Like every person's fuck up is important for the rest of the family unraveling.
Sure. The
like
silver cup.
It's not, it's not just that. It's not just Caleb and his lust. It's not just, Thomasin and her, I don't even know what her sin is. I guess it's not wanting to be accused of being a witch, or it's wanting to, maybe it's a little bit of, selfishness. It's not just Catherine's like faltering faith. Like, it's not just the twins being little shits. It's everything. It's every person messing up, and it's, it's William lying, and it's forcing his kids to lie. Like, and there's
the
pride.
way the mom kind of covets their life in England.
Yes, exactly.
Instead of fully committing to this new one.
It's all of them. And I kind of have, I'll get into it later to talk about these things, but I don't think there is one moment of temptation. I think the closest argument is Thomasin's prayer at the beginning, where she's asking God for forgiveness and saying, like, show me mercy, show me your light. And maybe you could argue that because right after that scene, when she prays, it cuts to when Samuel disappears. You could argue that, like, she, I don't know, has failed in some way, and that there's some temptation element there, but I don't really know what that would be. So I don't think there's one.
Yeah,
what do you think?
I think you're probably right. The closest I got, the kind of best candidate I could sniff out here, it's some level of wrath or spite from Thomasin when she's by the riverside, and she's mocking the twins because they're mocking her, and they're saying, I be the witch.
That is a significant
the
moment.
way she turns on them, and that whole monologue of her being the witch of the wood, like, my sympathies are totally with Thomasin, but she pushes that really far and gets really specific. She kind of role plays for a second.
Yeah,
And that is what ultimately damns Thomasin, because the way that comes back with these detailed accusations that the twins level against Thomasin after Caleb dies, and then the dad starts to believe it, that is what kind of destroys the house of cards that I mentioned earlier. I'm not blaming her.
No, I think you're right.
That's the linchpin moment.
I think so. I mean, I think also, like, but I think, like, the whole series of events doesn't happen without that, but also not without William taking the cup and forcing his kids to lie, and, like, it's all of this stuff. And I think that's sort of the point of like what I was talking about earlier, of this being like a representation of a puritanical society, is everybody is doing something wrong, and everybody is feeding into each other's guilt and paranoia.
And there's not one main character making one titular decision. It's all of these overlapping lives and desires and motivations and complications. Yeah, and all of these characters, you can watch any of the ensemble scenes and pay attention to any performance and just follow that storyline, and it makes sense. And their story is the hero story. I love the equal weighting of these characters. Something I got from that Brothers short film, because the younger brother, who becomes the main character there, running around the woods with a long gun, he's Caleb, right?
He's even got the shaved head.
He's even got the shaved head. So when I was watching it this time, I think the reason the Caleb performance spoke to me so much this time is because of the Brothers short film. He is a fully fledged character in a way that he could be the main character. There's such an attention given to every member of the family.
Yeah.
The last echo that I caught here was something from our Lighthouse discussion, where we talked about this a little bit with The Telltale Heart, but it was these repetitive work montages.
Yeah.
Where so much of how Winslow goes nuts in the lighthouse is him drinking anything he can find while doing all of this hard labor on the island. And Telltale Heart with the valet. But I thought it was interesting, almost in the same way we talk about these distillation echoes in our Game of Thrones episodes on Friday, where something will come back in the next chapter, and it'll be such a strong echo of what came before. It'll be so explicit and distilled down to its purest form that the characters almost seem to notice. I thought there was some of that here, which is weird, given that The Lighthouse comes after this and Telltale Heart comes before. But I thought the work montages in The Witch were almost the distillation echo of those other montages.
Interesting.
Because they're acknowledged in the narrative.
That's true. And they're not presented as montages. It's more like it's what's happening in the background of almost every dialogue scene.
But they're treated as B-roll in Telltale Heart and The Lighthouse, versus they are weaponized in dialogue here.
Yes.
When Thomasin screams at her dad, all you can do is chop wood.
Yeah, right. And they're talking about the corn is not good enough. And like, Jonas Mercy, help me with the go. It's like, it's all they talk about is this grueling labor that they all have to do every single day. Like that's a big driving force behind everything that goes wrong. So yeah, I do like that. So he's really interested in like hard physical labor that doesn't get you anywhere. That's really funny. I like that.
Yeah. So the last thing we wanted to talk about in this discussion, in this episode that we've waited so long to do, is just rewatching this film in theaters after almost 10 years. Some new observations that kind of popped out at us. I can start with one that I think you'll jump off of.
Okay, sure.
I mean, this is sort of just a quick hit. I noticed that the film is basically bookended with Thomasin in prayer. At the beginning, she's praying to God, and at the end of the movie, she's more or less praying to Black Phillip / Satan.
Yeah. Absolutely. So I really dove into this because I had never really thought about this prayer that she gives before. I mean, I always noticed it and thought it was, oh, okay, cool. For me, the function it was serving was I get an understanding of how, at least Thomasin, if not this whole family, how they pray, how they think about guilt and sin, and how they think about their relationship with God at this time. And that sort of frames, okay, that's why they all are so suspicious of one another and why they all carry so much guilt about their sin and they're all worried about going to hell. Makes sense. But what I found it really doing here was sort of framing the entire arc of the story. Because I noticed as she's giving this prayer, you get shots of the whole family and as well as her, and like shots of the farm and this labor like you're talking about. But then again, immediately after she finishes her prayer, the next scene is when Samuel disappears. And that is like very arguably the like inciting incident. You could argue also that maybe them being banished from the plantation is the inciting incident, but I think it's like the biggest thing that really throws these people for a loop is Samuel disappearing, because you see them as they go out into the wilderness. They look upset and maybe afraid and stressed, but also you see them trying to stay connected as a family. Like, you know, the mother's holding the baby and smiling, and they've worked really hard and they've built this little farm and they're all doing great. Like they're really trying and making an effort, and they seem like a pretty good unit of people. It's when Sam disappears that everything goes sideways, and that happens right after the prayer. I'm going to read you the prayer that she reads, or that she says, and then I kind of want to spend a few minutes breaking it down if you'll indulge me a little bit. So Thomasin says, I here confess I've lived in sin. I'm not going to do her accent, by the way. But let me work. Okay. I here confess I've lived in sin. I've been idle of my work, disobedient of my parents, neglectful of my prayer. I have in secret played upon thy Sabbath and broken every one of thy commandments in thought. Followed the desires of mine own will and not the Holy Spirit. I know I deserve all shame and misery in this life and everlasting hellfire. But I beg thee, for the sake of thy Son, forgive me, show me mercy, show me thy light. And I think this is sort of like her I Want song at the beginning of a musical. This is her My Shot. This is her Wizard and I. Like she's trying...
Character motivations.
Yes.
Sure.
She wants to be this good Christian. But she not only does she like want to be better, she wants to be forgiven and she wants to be shown the light. Uh-huh. Okay. And I was really struck most especially in this prayer by her talking about the commandments. Because she says, I've played upon the Sabbath and I've been disobedient to my parents, and I've broken every one of thy commandments and thoughts. And I was like, girl, really? And so I went through. So the 10 Commandments are a pinnacle of Christian ideology and morals. And so I thought, okay, how could she have possibly broken all 10 commandments in thought? Thinking about committing sin through thought is so interesting to me. It was a big part of my religious upbringing of like, you can commit sin just by thinking about it. Very 1984, very cool. Love that for me. But so I went through the 10 Commandments and I want to talk about, I went through them. I really think we can make an argument for her breaking every single one of these. And I'm not just doing this for fun. I have a reason. So we'll get there. So first I want to make sure that I'm looking at the correct 10 Commandments, because there are different translations of the Bible. Different translations say different things. The Bible that Puritans would have used is the Geneva Bible, which predates the King James Bible. Puritans were not a fan of the King James Bible. That's much more popular with Catholics. So the Geneva Bible, here's what the 10 Commandments are. I'm going to go through them and talk about how she could have broken them in thought. So the first one is, thou shalt have none other gods before me. And that could mean worshiping other gods, or it could just mean not making God important enough. It could mean loving other things more than God.
Idolatry.
Yeah, it doesn't necessarily mean like worshiping, Vishnu. It could also mean
or the
like
farm goat.
It could mean caring more about other things more than God. So you could see her caring more about, being idle and having fun, or eating
the taste of butter,
yeah,
a pretty dress,
anything, right? So that one for sure, fine, easy. Next one, thou shalt make thee no graven image, and then it goes on and on, basically saying no idols, no false idols. Again, the way that my understanding of Christianity, for context, I was raised in the Christianity that's like very Protestant, very like I wasn't raised in puritanical society. Okay, it wasn't that extreme, but
you'd look good in one of those little bonnets.
Thank you. The way I was taught to think about prayer and religion and your relationship to God and sin is similar and just less extreme than what these Puritans are doing. But so I don't think in thought that Thomason was carving an idol, but I think she was, again, focusing on or caring more about things more than God. So I think that one is pretty easy to understand. The next one, thou shalt not take the name of thy Lord God in vain. Okay, that makes sense. She might have said, Jesus Christ in her head. Cool. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. Okay, so she already said she's literally played upon the Sabbath, but also she could have wanted, on the Sabbath day, wanted to, you know what? I know it's Sunday, but I really think I should go, tend to the goats because I need to take care of the farm. She could have thought about that. Okay, fine. Next one, honor thy father and thy mother, blah, 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 blah. Okay, she might have felt not honorable to her parents in her head. Easy. Next one, thou shalt not kill. If she said, I've broken every one of your commandments in thought, does that mean she has imagined killing somebody? Maybe it's somebody in her family. Maybe it's somebody who used to live who was at the plantation, but she's contemplated killing somebody.
Interesting.
So that's freaky. Next one, thou shalt not commit adultery. Adultery is an interesting one because when you're married, adultery makes sense. You are, being unfaithful to your spouse. You're having sex with somebody else. In a lot of Christian thought, the idea is that, so if sex is only supposed to happen during marriage, that means there's only one person out there who's meant to be your husband or wife. And so the way I was taught to think growing up is that even thinking about having sex with anybody who is not your spouse is adultery.
Interesting.
And so,
okay.
So then I'm thinking, who is she imagining? Because if she's just with her family, is it somebody in her family, or is she imagining somebody from the plantation, or is she just imagining
they were in England?
Sure. Or is she just having normal teenage girl thoughts where she's kind of thinking about sex in the abstract?
Fantasies.
Either way, she's had that in her head. Next one, thou shalt not steal. Maybe she's thought about stealing something because they're hungry and desperate and cold. Okay.
Or because she's a kid.
Right.
Kids test boundaries.
Yeah, sure. Right. Next one, thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor. Maybe she's thought about, I wish I want to tell, mother that Caleb did this mean thing to me because I'm mad at him. So that could be a thought she's had.
We see the way the parents reprimand her when she tries to parent Jonas and Mercy. So yeah, there is some overstepping even on screen there.
Definitely. And finally, thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's house, thy neighbor's wife, manservant. Basically don't be jealous of other people's things. So I'm sure that's a thought she's had when they're living in such, poverty and squalor.
All of them kind of have that throughout the film. Yeah.
Yes. So it's interesting that she says that she has done all of those things in her head. That's pretty freaky and alarming. So then I thought, okay, if this prayer is sort of the inciting incident or not the inciting incident, the framing device for everything that happens after it, do all of these commandments get broken over the course of the movie in actuality, not just in thought? Because I think the implication by saying I've broken all of your commandments in thought, and then when things start to escalate, I think our next thought is, have they done this in real life? And I was kind of tracking them all. And I don't think you can argue that Thomason has done all of these, but this is sort of my point, is that it's everybody in the family sinning. It's everybody doing things wrong and messing up. And I've looked through them, and I think you can argue that all of these commandments are broken over the course of the movie. So if we go back to the first commandment, thou shalt have no other gods before me. Not only does Thomason eventually accept the devil as her new god, that one's pretty bleak, but even before that, Catherine has this whole confession to William where she says that she's almost lost her faith and doesn't feel close to God anymore. So I think that's a pretty strong argument for that commandment being broken. By the way, if you think of anything as I'm going through, feel free to jump in.
Okay, yeah.
The next one, thou shalt make thee no graven image, blah, 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 blah. So I said false idols, that kind of thing. If you want to take it more literally, I think when Catherine is having her dream possession scene, the silver cup in the background, it reappearing in the scene,
Ooh.
feels to me, it's like placed in this way that feels like it's this holy idol or this holy, pinnacle relic, exactly. And that's a big thing that Puritans and Protestants hate about Catholicism, is this like worshiping of objects,
the finery. Yes.
But so I think that cup acts as a holy idol. I think not only like metaphorically for the family, but also more literally for Catherine. The next one, thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God take the name of the Lord thy God in vain. So take the Lord's name in vain. Nobody ever actually swears in this movie, as far as I can remember. Nobody says like, oh, Jesus fucking Christ, or I swear to God. Nobody says that. But during Caleb's possession, when they're all saying the Lord's Prayer, it says, our Father who art in heaven. And then the next line is, hallowed be thy name. After that line is when the prayer stops and the twins confess that they can't remember their prayer. So it's at that line, hallowed be thy name, is when they can't pray anymore, which suggests that they cannot honor God's name or prevent it from being taken in vain. So that one's pretty fun.
And they're lying. But yeah.
They are lying, but still, like they are refusing to hallow God's name. And that, I think you could argue, is you are committing that sin.
The twins are bullshitters. I've always said this.
Yeah, I hate the twins. The next one is, I think, the toughest one to prove is remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. So I said I was tracking the timeline of this movie. It only takes place like after shit starts to go down. It only takes place over the course of about 4 days. So you could argue like if day one starts on a Wednesday or a Thursday, then yeah, they're not going to be able to keep the Sabbath because stuff's going on and they're not resting on Sunday. But what if day one starts on Monday? Then maybe they do get to honor the Sabbath after all. I don't know. So that one I can't prove, but you could argue. Oh, okay, go ahead.
So we see them, we see them settle by the forest. We see them arrive at this place that they will build into a farm. And I was really struck by when they're all sleeping and Caleb wakes up first and he gets his shoes and he stands at the window. Yeah. I was struck by the window because the dad is the only one who's building stuff. Yeah. Right? Caleb can hand him tools like the son in Christmas Vacation, but
sure.
The dad builds this entire house and the hearth and the pen and the little house for the goats, and he's building all of this. While you're doing that, while you're, beginning homesteading all of that, he's not taking days off. Them building the farm to house your family and going off and hunting to find food when they're passing around this shitty pita bread, there's no way the dad is taking days off, especially when they're beginning this farm that they're trying to put together.
Yeah, you might be right.
The way he's hacking everything apart, the way his pastime is to chop up wood, there's no way he's taking a full day off of work.
Sure.
Ever.
And even if he is, like, before things start to really go south, like, I think you're probably right, but even if he is, there's an argument to be made that once things start to fall apart, like, even if none of these events take place on a Sunday, they are all like there's the implication that like nobody's talking about, well, we can't go to town the day after tomorrow because it's the Sabbath. Like nobody's concerned about the Sabbath right now because they're dying and like their kids are missing and like they're starving and like so there's no, as you hear them making all these plans over and over again, none of them come to fruition. But okay, well, I'll ride to town tomorrow and then I'll trade this thing and I'll do this thing, but they're never saying, well, we have to make sure we get it done by tomorrow because the next day is Sunday. Like nobody's concerned about the Sabbath. So I think either way, Sabbath is not being observed by this family at this point. So, okay, that's another commandment broken. The fifth one is honor thy father and thy mother. All of the kids disobey their parents at some point. Caleb goes into the woods. Thomason goes with him. The Jonas and Mercy don't listen to the parents when they tell them to stop screaming. Everybody's lying to each other. So like everybody breaks that rule. Okay. Thou shalt not kill is the next one. Thomason is the only one who actually kills anybody, because Caleb is killed by whatever's possessing him. Samuel is killed by the witch. William is killed by the goat, and Jonas and Mercy are also presumably killed by the goats or whatever creepy witch lady is inside the pen, hard to say. But then the mother, Catherine, is killed by Thomason. So she is the one who actually kills. So way to go, Thomason.
That seems to be the big one.
Yeah.
Of the commandments, that's the one.
I don't know why it's number 6. Like, why isn't it number 1? But okay.
Just kind of buried in the middle.
I also like that honor thy father and thy mother is before don't kill anybody, but whatever. The next one is thou shalt not commit adultery. So Caleb is the one who breaks this rule because he we at least see him kissing this witch, the sexy witch, and it's presumed that other things happen. We don't know, but like there's a strong argument to be made that Caleb is doing something with this witch, which would be considered adultery. Again, he's obviously not married, but in this way of thinking, if you have any sort of sexual interaction with somebody who's not your spouse, even if you're not married yet, that's adultery.
They wouldn't have the 21st century conception of consent.
Not so much, no. So Caleb does that. Okay. The next one, thou shalt not steal. We see that William stole the silver cup to trade for the traps, and also Caleb and Thomason steal the horse and gun to go collect the animals from the traps. So lots of theft is happening there. The next one, thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor. The twins bear false witness against Thomason. Thomason bears false witness against the twins. Everybody's lying about their witches. She's a witch. She did this. Well, she said she did this. So there's a lot of that happening. And then finally, thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's house. Again, there are no neighbors in this story because they're living alone.
Except the witches.
Well, sure. But you see the whole family coveting what the other Puritans on the plantation have. They're coveting what they used to have back in England. So there's a lot of like coveting of apples and glass windows and butter and a pretty dress and a fat milk cow and like all of this stuff. They are coveting so much because they are so without on this farm together. So everybody is wishing they had more things than what they have now. So all of the commandments are officially broken by everybody in this family. And that seems to be the undoing of it all. I think what I love the most about this movie is that there is a witch, or there are multiple witches in this movie doing stuff and causing problems. But I think if you break it down, this family comes apart because of the family. Like, they're facing really difficult circumstances. They're facing horrific things happening. Their child is murdered. Their other child is possessed and all this stuff. But they're the ones who make it all fall apart. It's their mistrust of each other. It's them arguably disobeying all of these commandments. It's them lying to one another. It's betraying each other, forcing your kid to lie to his own mom because you don't want to do this thing. Like, that is what makes it all fall apart. So it's the breaking of these commandments that I think damns them all rather than an actual witch. And I found that to be really scary and interesting and fun.
I think that's beautiful. That's fantastic analysis. I love that.
I had a lot of fun diving into it. I know it was a bit long, but
no, you did it backwards and forwards. It's fantastic.
Really excited about it.
Very cool.
And I really liked how you sort of talked about the sandwiching, the mirroring of Thomason's two prayers. Again, to God at the beginning, and then at the end when she is praying at Black Phillip. And there's a nice contrast there, like visually. When Thomason is praying, she is in this like desaturated, like cold, bright daylight, and she's looking up at God. When she's praying to Black Phillip, she's in this dark, warm, candlelit interior. Her hair is down and she's looking down at Black Phillip. There's like a lovely contrast between the two. And when she, her last words in the first prayer are, "Show me thy light." And then at the end, you see her looking at this candlelight with Black Phillip. And then the final line of the whole movie is him saying, "I will guide thy hand." So instead of saying, "Show me the light," he says, "I will guide your hand."
Right.
And so there's this lovely symmetry and shifting of, who Thomason becomes and what she starts to believe in and pray to.
That's beautiful.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It was a lot of fun.
I think some of my lingering observations piggyback off of things you've just done a much better job talking about. So
no, I'm excited.
One of them is kind of jumping on something you mentioned a little while ago now about Jonas and Mercy dying off screen. Because I guess it's in some way, some subliminal way, I'd realized that before. I assumed they were dead because they never shut up when they're alive, and they're very quiet at the end, so something must have happened.
I hate those twins so much.
Me too. They do such a good job.
They're perfect, yeah.
But the fact that they die off screen, I think you can chalk that up to what we've been talking about before with the power of suggestion through every aspect of this movie. And I love that they're more or less symbolically represented by those two dead goats. Like, you don't see the two dead kids, but you see the two dead goats, and your brain just kind of fills in the rest.
And you're like, oh shit, are those the twins? Like, you have that thought when you first see it, and then you're like, oh no, those are goats. Where are the twins? Oh, they're probably dead. Yeah.
And we talked about, this is something maybe you and I have talked about before, but it really hit me on this viewing, was Caleb. with the witch. So obviously you talked about the Puritans wouldn't have the understanding of consent that we do now, and they would call that adultery, but we would call that rape or sexual assault. Whatever the witch does to him behind closed doors, that then he comes back and he's all screwed up and bruised and cut up.
It's not cool.
I mean, that's the implication. Yeah. That's at least what I took from the scene and the suggestion upon this viewing.
Me too.
But it got me thinking about the witch, because we see the young, scary, pretty one, who the little Red Riding Hood one who opens the door. We see that one. We see the one taking the mortar and pestle to Samwise. Yeah, is that Samwell?
It's just Samuel.
Samuel,
just a normal name. He's not a fantasy character.
I'm all flustered.
Samwise. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Sam, not so wise.
Well, we're reading Game of Thrones right now, so we got Samwell Tarly on the brain.
Yeah, it's all in a big soup in my brain. So you have the Red Riding Hood, scary young witch. You have the naked witch who's killing baby Sam, and then you have the turnaround laughing witch who's
in the goat
drinking
pen.
the goat milk.
Yeah.
And I always assumed these were variations on a theme, that these were different forms, different lightings, different angles of the same witch. But let's test that a little bit.
Okay, yeah.
Because at the end, when Thomason attends the bonfire party, there are a bunch of witches there.
There are a lot of them, and there are a range of ages and hair colors and body types. Yeah.
And I assumed that the witch who kills Sam is the witch who assaults Caleb.
Yeah, I always assumed it was the same witch taking different forms.
Yeah, or just aging aggressively. I don't know. I don't know how quickly they have to find a new baby to get back to being young. I don't know how the magic system works.
She becomes young via the... Interesting. I hadn't thought about
that. Maybe she starts old when she kills Samwise. Right. Sam. I'm going to keep doing that. And that, whatever she does to Sam, makes her the young Little Red Riding Hood witch.
I see.
Then maybe she ages back up already by the time she kills Jonas and Mercy.
Yeah.
That could be the same one, or it could absolutely be different ones, because the title of the movie being The Witch, by the end of the movie you're like, oh, that's Thomason.
Yeah.
But when you're going in and you're seeing the witches pop up, you assume it's one witch in the woods haunting this family.
Right.
But what if it's just the whole coven? Like, what if, you talked about the neighbors before, what if it is this whole coven just picking off the family?
I see.
Like a new food source has moved in, and they're all just taking bites out of the family.
Hey, you take the kid, I'll take the baby, you deal with the teenage daughter, we could probably get her, you really focus on her. Yeah, I could see that.
Does that change your conception of it?
It does, because I've always wondered both directions for this. I've thought, okay, is there a single witch? Is it multiple? Because the ending really does ask you to question that. And I've never had a strong thought about what it would be, and I've always kind of enjoyed that. I mean, the more we're talking about it, I don't know, I think the more it doesn't really matter. Because I could also see that all of the witches around the bonfire at the end, they may not even be there. It might just be this thing that's in her head.
They might be souls.
Right. I think it's not as material as we want it to be. And I think that's what the movie does such a good job at, is making it feel so immaterial and hard to pin down. Because also you've got things like not only Black Phillip, who's, the devil, but also the hare, the crow, like these other, and even the goats, like these other creatures that seem to be possessed by, or at least imbued with some sort of spirit or something. That is there a witch inside the hare? Is there a witch inside the crow? Like, is there a witch inside Caleb? Like, it's a lot more immaterial than I think we're able to answer.
This reminds me of what we talked about last week in the Lighthouse episode, where we talked about the Lovecraftian surreal, how you gesture at these huge things and you don't give all the answers.
You never see the Kraken. Yeah.
Right. You see some weird tentacles, and then you see one shot of Willem Dafoe where he looks like, I don't know, Triton from The Little Mermaid, but you don't get answers particularly. And I love that there's this kind of optional Lovecraftian tone to the witch, where it could be one witch maniacally haunting and devastating and destroying this family, which would make the idea of all of these witches seem that much scarier. If we've seen what one can do.
Yeah, what can a whole coven do? Yeah.
Or it makes the coven seem incredibly coordinated and capable. Like, it's scary either way.
Yeah, it really is. Yeah, I know what you're saying. Yeah, I like how ambiguous it becomes by the end.
I think the change for me, maybe the difference maker, is that when you see the Red Riding Hood witch open the door and kind of seduce and then kill Caleb, I always assumed that was the witch who killed Sam.
Me too.
And when the old lady hand comes around the back,
Yeah.
I assumed like, oh, that was the hatred or resentment or jealousy or whatever she has for the family from already killing the younger brother.
Oh,
I just
interesting.
assumed that was more of that aggression of like, here's the next, round, the next snack I'm taking from these people.
Interesting.
But if that's not building on an earlier attack, if that's just another witch having another meal, it just makes them more terrifying for me.
I see what you're saying. Yeah, because you do get to see the interior of a witch's hovel a little bit after she takes Sam. You see her, doing her thing. But there's no real visual confirmation that interior is the same as the exterior of the hovel that we see the sexy witch come out of. So you're right, there could be multiple throughout the woods, and it's not totally clear. And
it's a great
I like
evolution from what he did with the Hansel and Gretel witch. Where it was more linear there. You saw the outside of the house, you saw the inside of the house, and it was just one witch bopping around in there.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I love these kind of evolutions that we're getting through the filmography.
This is a random thing. I noticed when Sexy Witch comes out of her hovel, the first part of her you see is her foot. You see her really pale white foot kind of coming out of the doorway, and then the entire witch is revealed, and it's really haunting and unsettling. And the sound design is so good in that moment. Like, you just hear this like soft music, and you don't actually really hear any other sound effects of the atmosphere. That same thing happens in Catherine's dream. When she gets out of bed, the first thing you see is her foot emerging out of the bed. And I thought that was such a great parallel. And I thought it was like, it made a nice both like contrast and connection between Catherine and the witch. And so that to me was like our visual indicator that she has now been possessed by some sort of witchery or devilry going on.
Or seduced in her own way.
Yeah, right. Yeah, but by the thought of having her children again. Like, that's what really gets her. Like, for Caleb, his thing is what he wants is sex. What Catherine wants is her children back. And that's what the, devil Caleb offers her, is to have her children back. So.
That's interesting. Because when you said that, I was thinking we never see anything with like a Thomason foot. Because I was drawing the comparison between Thomason and the sexy witch.
But then it's Catherine.
It really
instead.
is the whole family. I love this cross-pollination you're doing. One of the things that really got me from this viewing was how insular the film is. And I know it was made for like $4 million, which is incredible for how good it looks.
I know. It's crazy.
But almost the entire movie is just the family on a farm. And I think they built all those sets.
They did. They look so good.
But it doesn't ever feel small. It doesn't feel like a bottle episode to me, or something where they're saving money in every shot.
I see, yeah.
And I think it's because there are all of these feints and kind of magic tricks that open up the world in our minds. It's the way Robert Eggers teases more to this world than just the family on the farm. When you see the parents in bed, when they're whispering and talking about all the problems and plans that they have, and they discuss sending Thomason to go work for a well-to-do family and bringing her into town, as they bring up and kind of bat around this possibility, you as the audience, because you're just looking at two people talking, you start to imagine it. You start to picture the town. You start to picture Thomason in her, riding hat and her being shepherded off to this new family.
And like a bigger, better farm and a nicer house and other people, yeah.
And then you remember the intro sequence, the only spot of civilization we see in this film, when they're leaving the Puritan colony, when they're with that awful council in the beginning, and then you see a couple of the Native Americans and the big gates closing behind them. So you remember that moment where the world was bigger, which I'm sure was much more expensive. There's an economical way of telling this story where you broaden the world without us actually having to leave the farm.
I see, yeah.
The way they talk about and tease that possibility, we don't even have to do it, but we've already kind of gone on that journey. But it's doubly efficient because we're also accelerating the drama. Thomason not wanting to leave the family and go off to town, that's kind of the thing that motivates the implosion at the end.
Yes.
That motivates her. That adds to the tension. That's another ticking clock with this drama. And I just loved that feint.
Because, I like that, yeah.
Like, if you gave Robert Eggers however much money he got for Nosferatu, if you gave him that much money and told him to remake The Witch as a thought experiment just for this show, I'm sure it would be a broader story.
We'd probably see more of the town. We'd see more of
that journey, maybe at the beginning.
Right. It's never totally clear why William and his family are banished at all. They just say like he's
theological disagreements.
Yeah, they're like he's being like prideful and conceited, but you don't really know what that means. Like how did that actually manifest? What has he actually done wrong? And it doesn't really matter. But like I feel like you would see more of the undoing of what gets them banished in the first place.
It's such a remarkable kind of aligning of the stars, because I think this story feels perfect at this scale without ever feeling small.
I was going to say, I don't want to see that actually.
Oh, totally.
Like
totally.
I don't want to see the journey from England. Again, they invite us to imagine that journey and imagine their old house, because that's so much of what the characters are doing is they are imagining a better life or are fearing a bad change in their circumstances.
Yes.
Like it's all about imagination and thought crime and thinking about things in the wrong way. So I think that is totally the right direction.
Well, that's sort of where I want to end, is with that kind of theological thought crime. The other way that this film has tied into my life is, of course, a philosophy degree and theology and all this other shit that I spend all my time doing. But I wanted to... I was watching The Dad. I always watch Ralph Ineson. I think it's just such a magnetic performance. But I was trying to process the dialogue more as I was watching his performance. And in the same way we talked about guilt as this thematic grindstone throughout Robert Eggers' filmography, you talked about this being a story more or less about Puritan excess. Mm-hmm. I really love that it is never for a single moment glib or dismissive about faith. And I think a lot of that is concentrated in William's character. Like, it doesn't matter for me. Like, I'm stepping on myself here. The way The Exorcist is an incredibly Christian film, the way Terrifier 3 was an incredibly Christian film, it doesn't matter that it shows people swearing or killing people or doing all of these sinful things. It's about the rules.
Right? But it's like none of those films are... They both are and are not critiquing religion and like the organization of Christianity or Catholicism or they're the same, right? But so like The Exorcist, for example, here like you see both the success and like the good things about Christianity and how it is able to save this woman. This exorcism saves this girl, right? But also you see this man struggling with his mother is dying and he can't take care of her. And so like, how could a, good and just God allow this to happen? So you see that. And also there's even like thinking about the Catholic Church, you as a modern audience member are like, ooh, Catholic Church, there's a problem there, right? And then here...
But he's so earnest.
Right. And then here, when you're looking at this Puritanism, you're seeing all of its faults and how it can implode and cause so much strife and fear and paranoia and, anger and violence. But also, like I just, spent 20 minutes doing, them not following the rules is what breaks this down. And you see them clinging to their faith. Like what I love about both of those movies, as I said, I grew up in Christianity. I no longer, I'm fully atheist. I don't believe in anything now. But in both of those movies, when there are these big moments of prayer, during the exorcism when the priests are praying, and then during Caleb's possession scene when the family is praying, I got goosebumps. Because I was thinking about how powerful prayer can be when you really believe in it. And so it's interesting that both of these movies critique but also celebrate religion at the same time. It's really interesting.
Father Karras is one of my favorite characters in all of fiction. And there is not a single frame of that movie or that performance that is sneering or snide or cheap. It's a die-hard commitment to that worldview. Yeah. It's a real embodiment of that spirit.
Yeah, it's not like a guy on r/atheism made this movie. No, do you know what I mean?
No, I mean, I don't go an hour of my life without thinking about specifically Christian theology and grappling with it.
Right.
And my beliefs have nothing to do with that.
Right.
My personal conviction has nothing to do with how boundlessly fascinated I am with that subject.
Yes.
And I found that here. I mean, we both, religious horror as sort of a subgenre, we both adore.
Love it.
Maybe for different reasons, but that is something that we share. And I loved William in particular as a character who is the center of the theology in this film. I think there's a lot of everyone else talking about it, but I don't think anyone else struggles with it as much as William does.
Yeah.
And I found myself tearing up more during this viewing than I think I ever have. And I've seen this film many times, but it was the way he was talking to Catherine in bed every time they would have a new loss, a new kid die, a new kid disappear, the way he moved the goalposts of saying, well, God has never taken a kid from us before. Right. And he's showing us humility, and he's showing us even more of his grace, reaching for that humility and gratitude every time he lost something. I thought that was incredible. It was deeply touching and painful and human and desperate, but it was never ever a caricature or a scarecrow.
No, what that accomplishes is you see how religion can be so grounding and comforting for people. You see, like, I understand how people think about things and how this, like, you know, backdrop of their religious beliefs is the way that they understand the world and the way they reckon with the hard shit of life. Because that's what religion is. It's like, how can I make sense of the problem of evil? How can I make sense of things going wrong in my life? How can I be okay with it? How can I reckon with it? And there are different avenues you go down, but like helping you understand that is like, oh wow, that's such a human thing. And so you really get an understanding of it. You're like, okay, I see why plenty of people use religion. Like, because you can read William's words as like, that is a fucked up way to think about life. Like, why would God kill your child so that you'll be more humble and see his grace? Or you could look at it as, that's how I make sense of my child is dead, is like, I have to make this something good so that I can be okay. It's really
learning from it, but not getting wrathful and resentful and raging at the world.
Right. Like, yeah. Like, it might make you a better person if that's how you think about the world. It's interesting.
Taking it back to Father Karras, I think that's why he's one of my favorite characters in all of fiction, because he's not embittered, even though we see so many reasons for him to be. And I think my ideal conception of Christianity, of theology in general, of any sort of faith, inherent to that faith is grappling with faith, is questioning and struggling and straining and rattling the cage. And I think William does such a beautiful job there, where he's not this kind of dumb, like simplified, oh, every time we cut to him, he's praying. He's just religious. He just rationalizes everything. It's not that.
No, it's him struggling and grappling constantly. Yeah. And you know what's great is Thomason's name is the female version of Thomas. Thomas is the apostle who doubts. When Jesus dies and is resurrected and comes back and like meets all of his disciples, Thomas doubts that it's really Christ. He doesn't believe him, and he has to see proof of the wounds in his hands and feet to know that it's him. And that doubting is what Thomason sort of gets to represent here. But I think you can extend it to the whole family. You see all of them doubting. You see all of them questioning.
Sure.
Caleb literally questions. Catherine talks about her failing faith. You just talked about William, even the twins who are too young to really get it, but you see them
bullshitters.
You see them doubting themselves, doubting their parents, doubting Thomason. So it happens to all of them.
And this is sort of the question, because as much as William is the root of the theology in this family, he's also, I mean, you talked about the thought crime and the suspicion, like what that means from that Orwellian perspective is suspicion and paranoia and surveillance. There's so much of that there. And he becomes the, chief surveiller. He becomes the one watching and looking and investigating.
Sure.
And it's because he doesn't want there to be a witch in his family. And all of this paranoia, when we get the revelations at the end of the film, we get these, I mean, I talk about this in Faustus all the time, we get the confirmation. When he signs away his soul and tries to summon a devil, even as someone who's not sure if he even believes at this point, when he tries to summon a demon and a demon shows up and says, here, sign on the dotted line. This is an aged theologian who's been studying and questioning for his entire life. When the demon shows up, lights out. That is confirmation that all of this is true.
Yeah.
That is the answer he was looking for. Even all the wonders he gets to see after he signs on the dotted line, it's all secondary to that first moment of confirmation, of actualization of that religion. It's interesting that the end of the film gives us that same clarity, because the early feints and suggestions could just be taken as metaphors in storytelling. Oh, there's a fucked up rabbit. Oh, there's a weird goat. Oh, there's this weird, probably dream sequence about the crow breastfeeding.
Like, oh, they're all just kind of going a little bit insane. Yeah.
Or it could be like The Crucible, where we see how people weaponize suspicions, fears, folktales to turn on each other and get what they want. And it's just about hubris and self-satisfaction, and it could be that. It could be a parable. But that's not how Eggers ends the film.
Right.
He shows us the Blackbeard pirate Black
Yeah,
Phillip
we see
walking,
actual Black Phillip. Yep.
and then you see the witches.
Yeah.
And then you see Thomason break the rules of gravity and do something supernatural and become a witch. So we get that confirmation at the end of the film. We get that Faustus thing, that it is real. Does that revelation and confirmation, does that vindicate William? His faith and fear? Was he right? Because you could argue that he kind of accelerates the destruction of his family with accusing everyone of being witches and locking people up in chicken pens. But is he right? Is he vindicated by the way Eggers chooses to confirm the theology at the end of the film?
I see. Well, yeah, I think yes and no. Like, yes, but I think what that does is tell us that it's not him accusing people of being witches that fucks everything up. It's him stealing the cup and lying. Like, it's that human, like, earthly betrayal that all of these people commit. That's what causes everything to go wrong. And like, with the background of this, like, theological framework that they're existing in. But so, yeah, I think it does. Like, it's not him accusing people of being witches that causes everything to fall apart. The fact that the witches exist is sort of proof that their theological worldview is correct, which then supports the fact that them breaking these 10 commandments is what they're being punished for. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, there's a quote on the back of my favorite copy of Marlowe's Faustus, and I'm paraphrasing. I think it's from David Wooten. I don't know why I know that. I do, because it's my favorite book.
Because I think I know why you know.
But the quote I'm paraphrasing is basically, by the end of the play, Christian theology is proven correct, but the non-believer gets all the best lines. And I think you can play with that idea with a lot of religious horror. I mean, I've argued at various points in my life that Marlowe, that what he's doing in Doctor Faustus is a full-hearted critique of religion.
Yeah.
But you can also read it as he's a true believer.
Yes.
And this is a warning and a parable to tell people to not question God or try to prove any of this. And there's some things we shouldn't know. And
yeah, sure.
I think you could make the same argument. I have made the same argument about Paradise Lost, about the Divine Comedy. I think you could argue either way. But in all of these stories, at the end of the day, the true kind of Christian reading of it, of all of this is true and right and just, that's what wins out. But I love that that's not the end of the conversation.
Right, yeah.
It's not about, she goes to the dark side at the end of the movie. Because you could read this as an incredibly faithful rendition of Christianity. Like, you don't know anything about Robert Eggers from what happens at the end of the
Yes,
the
right.
movie.
It's not like, now, like, the woman has been liberated from the oppressive religious system and now she's a free witch. Like, you can read it that way. But I think everything you talked about here suggests that it's much more complicated than that. Because, like, I think what I was trying to say before was we get proof and confirmation that their way that they think about religion and witches is real with the ending. And the fact that they all end up dead at the end as sort of like punishment for them committing these sins is proof that those sins, like breaking those commandments, is wrong. But also it's proof that, like, in Puritan thought, everybody is a sinner and you can't do anything about it. You are born a sinner, you live a sinner, and you die a sinner. Like, you cannot stop yourself from being a sinner. Nobody is perfect. And no matter how hard we try, we all end up sinning. And so they all end up dead. Even though William is really grappling with his faith, trying to do the right thing, he himself is sinning. He's prideful, he lies, he steals, he forces his kids to lie, he does all these things. And everybody else does all these things too. And so it's like proof that their belief system is true, because, and like, that's why they all fail, is because you can't win. Like, you can't, you can't win in this society. The only way you win is you hope that God forgives you and admits you into the kingdom of heaven. And that's what William says to Caleb. He says, only God can know. That is not something that I can tell you. I hope that we all end up in heaven when we die, but I don't know. There's nothing we can do about it.
It's hope. It's that it's unconfirmed. It's that these are questions that we all grapple with, and by the time we get answers, if we do get answers, it's too late to tell anyone about them. For me, as someone who's devoted my life to this kind of stuff, a successful work of art about religion has to be at once readable as slavishly faithful and blatantly heretical.
Yeah.
You have to be able to see it in both directions, because these are questions without answers, because we don't get confirmation. The fantasy of Faustus, the fantasy of the witch, is the confirmation either way.
Right.
So it has to work in both directions to engage our minds, to engage these questions that every person who's ever lived has struggled with. And I think The Witch is one of the very best renditions of that timeless story.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, that's probably why it's my favorite movie of all time.
I think I'm with you there. Absolutely. Plus, it looks great. This was really, really fun. I love this movie so much. God, I love this movie so much.
So yeah, we talked about The Lighthouse last week, and before that on Patreon, which you can still get, is an hour of us talking about Robert Eggers' 3 short films that preceded this film. That would be Telltale Heart, Hansel and Gretel, and Brothers. And next week, we'll be talking about The Northman, and after that, we'll be talking about his latest work, Nosferatu.
I'm so excited. And I haven't rewatched The Northman. I've only seen it the one time when it came out. It's my least favorite of his movies. I mean, I liked it, but it didn't stand out to me in the way the others did. So I'm excited to re-explore it and see what kind of discussions we can have with
Viking Hamlet next week. And on Fridays, we will continue our march through George R.R. Martin's Game of Thrones with all of our literary analysis over there. And speaking of books, we are brought to you today by our one and only non-sponsor, me. My latest novel and audio drama, Lemon Tarts in Space, which is a light science fiction dark comedy, is available now. It's been out for a few weeks now, and the response has been overwhelming. It is available in both formats. It's a fully produced, fully fledged audio drama. I did everything myself except for the voice of the lead character, Captain Duncan Arugula, which is our occasional guest star and all-time best friend, Tristan. And the novel is me. I fully adapted the audio drama to a novel format. It's not just a script. It is a full-bodied book that is available at the link in the bio.
Those are wonderful experiences, both in their own right, but also fun to have them together. What a great holiday gift for your friends. The paperback is $9.99. The audiobook, depending on where you buy it, is either $9.99 or an Audible credit, or you can find it on Spotify or do whatever the hell you do for audiobooks. Nobody knows anymore.
We made it as cheap as we possibly could.
Yes, please. Yes, thank you so much for the support. You can find the link down below. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. This was a long and beefy one, but a really, really fun one. Let us know what you think of anything we've discussed, of what you think of The Witch, of Robert Eggers. Are you excited for Nosferatu? We'd love to hear it. That's all I have. Thank you all so much, and we'll see you next week with another brand new episode.